Hi, this is Dale. So just what is involved in a planning masterclass? Well, there's quite a lot. It's not just about the spreadsheet that you see in front of you, although this spreadsheet does include all the steps that you need in terms of planning and writing and publishing your book. So if we just take a scroll through, you can see there's quite a lot of steps to take in planning the book. So we start off with looking at, what kind of planner you are. We want to know what your mission, your vision, and your core message for your business is, and your values, so that we can distill them down into the vision for your book and the core message for your book. Now, obviously, your book needs an idea. So we work until we find the right idea for that book right now. And we look at things like working out how long it's going to take you to write, what resources you want. And then we get to this really meaty bit that I call the heart spot. And the heart spot is where your vision for your book, the strategy, the reader, the research, and the content all come together. Now, we are subject matter experts, and we could have an awful lot of content to deliver to our ideal reader. And actually what we want to do is to distill the right content for the right reader right down for right now. So we'll be looking at things like vision and strategy, ideal reader, researching and closing the gap, things like titles, subtitles, book covers, creating an outline, chapter framework, book proposal, how on earth you're going to get it written. That'll be a conversation that we have. We'll talk about editing, and we'll talk about how we get all the way through to our final proof. And then, how we might upload it onto places like Amazon's CreateSpace and Kindle Direct Publishing. But we'll also talk about all the different publishing options and how you might go about choosing the right one for you. And we'll have a talk about what kind of things we might want to do when we come to marketing. So this is the journey. Now, part of that is we're going to look at things like, so we know we've got the full book plan. Well, we're going to look at how we create an outline. Now, this book in front of you is a very standard how-to book. That doesn't matter. What matters is that you know how your book flows. So if you're writing a memoir and a personal story, what is the flow to it? And you will end up with this thing like this, where you can see that we have different parts of the book, and we chunk our book down. So an outline is a way of creating flow, creating content, finding the story, finding the bits that we want to share in a way that makes sense. And we create the outline so that it is chunked down. Now, when we've created the outline and we have a chapter framework, so this is a very, very, very simple chapter framework. When we have that chapter framework, it makes it easier for us to write. Now, the other thing about a chapter framework is if you've got a how-to book, a framework kind of makes perfect sense. And if you're writing a story, sometimes, you're looking at how the story flows. When you've written the story, now I always recommend people just write their first draft. So you'll have some idea about how that story flows and how your journey is going to be mapped out. When you finish that journey, you can come back and you can say, what questions does this chapter answer? Have I explained, what this part of the story is about and why it's important for the reader to know it? Have I put enough thinking points in it with perhaps some questions that I've asked, or, have I brought my values out, or have I brought some key learning out? Does this chapter map back to the core message of my book? So when we've done those kind of things, we also need to think about our ideal reader. Now, our ideal reader, in fact, we think about that a long way. We think about our ideal reader a long way before we actually create our outline. But we have our ideal reader, and I use the unconscious competence model and take people through a process that starts with where you didn't know what you didn't know. And we go through and we say, what kind of questions were you asking? What kind of things was happening at each of these stages? So you start off with this part where you're waking up. It's the beginning. You've been asleep and something wakes you up. It's the ignition for your journey. And then you start to see a way through and you become aware. Then you start to make more conscious decisions. And then you just do whatever it is that you've learnt. But by going back and looking at this as you, we get a better understanding of what that journey is. Now, of course, the other things we need to look at in terms of our ideal reader is some of the demographics. We need to create some kind of archetype about them. We need to think about what kind of challenges, concerns, desires, where they hang out. We need to do an awful lot of research. And the reason that we need to know who our ideal reader is that when we've got that outline and that chapter framework and we know what the plan is, we are writing for one person because it makes a better book. So that's just some of what we will go through when we run the Plan Your Nonfiction Book in a Weekend masterclass. Any questions, please come and find me. My name is Dale Darley. The website is www.daledarley.com. You can find all of the information about all of the courses that I run on the Soul Writers Academy, and that's www.soulwritersacademy.com. And you can also find me on Facebook, Dale Darley, the word alchemist. And I look forward to answering any of your questions and helping you get your book, your story, this thing that you have come to share out of your head, planned out, mapped out, so that you are at a point where you are ready to write.